Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Green Bay Conservation Partners Spring Roundtable. The mission of the partnership is to strengthen collaborative efforts among diverse conservation stakeholders to support efficient and effective preservation and enhancement of the land, water, and other natural resources of Green Bay and the Lower Fox River watershed. This is our 8th Spring Roundtable. This is our 3rd virtual one. Think spring, just don't pay attention to the weather. I want to thank everybody for attending our event. I want to thank all of the speakers we have today, the great speakers that we have, and the students that provided the posters that you can view as part of this event. I want to mention how hard the steering committee worked to do this virtual event. This is our 3rd virtual event, and a lot goes into it. It's a lot of tech. I'm kind of excited this year because the last 2 I've had a laptop at my kitchen table with notepads on the side, and I actually have 3 monitors going. So I finally got into the tech area, so to speak. We do have a guest speaker to give us some opening comments and thoughts this morning. I'd like to introduce Luke Besaw from Menominee Tribe of Indians of Wisconsin. As we gather virtually today to share and learn about our conservation work in Northeast Wisconsin, we want to acknowledge the indigenous stewardship of the land and relationships to that land on which we gather. A little bit about Luke. He's a former Menominee language immersion daycare teacher, Menominee language immersion lead instructor, UW-Madison bachelor degree in linguistics is his educational background. Currently curriculum director for the language and culture teachers within the Menominee Tribal School and Menominee Indian School District. And I'll let Luke say his own name in the language and take it away, Luke.
Aha, Tatnat Manuiak, Otachia, Netakam, Mishik Nikiu Matnamani Waitnesim, Prosanokian, Mishik so my name is Otachia, or Luke Besaw, and I work with our language speakers and our language teachers in our school district and our immersion daycare teachers. So thanks for asking me to speak a little bit today. And one of the interesting things about language is it kind of teaches us a lot of our worldviews on the Menominee worldview on the earth and how we relate to all these animals. So one of the big things that kind of hit me right away was one of the big words when people are praying or speaking in the Matnamanaywitness and in Menominee, you'll hear them talk about Netanwe Makunuk. They'll usually end a prayer by saying Netanwe Makunuk, and that means all of my relatives, but it doesn't only extend to people, it extends to all of our relatives that crawl, all of our relatives that swim, that fly, all of the trees, the plants, and all of these different assets of Mother Nature. And even our word for, the world is Kokomasika now, and it means grandmother earth, but into that word means our grandmother of everything and everybody on it. So it extends even to those those fish, the things that crawl, the Wisconsin that fly, Mamikakos, peach kicking, everything that grows in the woods. And even the little bitty Watakasuk, our words for the creepy crawlies and all of the little spiders and the worms talks about them as little spirits, and they get treated just the same in our language, the same words we would use to talk about our brothers, sisters, mothers, dads, cousins, friends. We would use those same words to talk about a bird. They get treated just the same in our language, same as a tree would. So our language doesn't view these as anything separate than our relatives, because we all need each other to survive, and that's a very important relationship. So that's one thing we're really excited to kind of bring about, is we're hoping our language can bring in some changes and teach us more things that we don't know about our relationships with nature. So one of the cool stories I'm going to share at Chikanakikiti, and I got my Netnama, my tobacco here, so I'm going to say a little bit words. But before that, one of the really cool experiences for me was we went to Hawaii to visit their language program, and they were creating they call them fish gardens. So on the shores of the ocean, they would dig a pit where the water would come in, and there would be a little circle where the fish would gather, and they would basically grow fish naturally. But they didn't remember how they used to do it, the certain plants that had to be in there to create a good environment, and how to sustain those without the fish dying and other things happening, becoming too salty. So they used their word that they had, and I don't speak Hawaiian, so I can't remember it, but they had a word for fish garden, and they understood their language so well, they were able to piece it apart and take all the morphemes from it and decode it. And they found out how to make them fish gardens simply from understanding their language. So that's one of the things I'm really excited about, is what the children in our immersion daycares are going to be able to teach us about what our language has, you know, in regards to nature and what it can teach us yet that we don't understand fully from it. So it all comes back to sustainability and all of these other things that you guys are doing, and that's QC and Wicca that are happening Yope. But na house yeah, kato no watch kiki tim. Kimasa no come shikta moko na no. Shikta mama eha kom not mo koak. Tochi kim pas not the way he Yope. Mesia to takasia, mashikta whisky scozo in stema no way takasia. Pas kanapa chikamano, mauni kako, and matakur kikia, mauni wiak, and it's permit netua, minita wani wiak, and it's wiki tuak, and it's nepesa se, sipia, Q9 tua, Q tachi kitua, mashikta kipichi kitua, pitch kekin. Nikahkina na awani wetakusia kispin so mahno papimata siena mana. Numanata mino. Mishita kiwiki tamwa pasnata moya and tawaki kuchima and amual. Mishita sawana mia kispin cut mahno safety and monikako is yours. Kakino homoya kispin kiwachi there. Mishita wawanan sakunini katawa peach kekin moni hikasa in on. Mishita kata mahno samia he yours. Mishikta mama network and it's web course to a musasni hagihi. Not the more gun so cut some new networks was mahno mekaku ma matrum. Mishikta ma kako was menakua. Kinapa mekona komni chianak kitchkiwak manita se makinesak. Sta mahno papa mats to a winua upni. Na hauka mishik passing on makun nation once that mahno safety a monica on a minute minute so cut kishio anichikaya so cut nekosia weatasia plus mahno anichikaya moni wiak ma nich no kiwak ma nich pimata suak. Na hauka not the moya passing on makun. Ne tawakin ons te mahno noto wea maoni wea kehios so cut cake mea so cut mekatia wakichu awak haka that's ne kayan and we mark it. So that was just kind of a short prayer to ask to help us to bring all of our minds together right now to help work for the betterment of like I said, some of our relatives who sometimes may get overlooked, those ones that are crawling in the soil, the ones that are living in our rivers and our lakes, ones that are flying and living in the trees and doing all these things for us that are helping keep the environment going and kind of helping us sustain the life we're building. And just to help us to better work together, you know, to take away all of the stuff in our outside lives that might kind of encroach and help all of the things fall into place so that we can be the best people we need to be to get some of this work done and to just be happy and have fun while we're doing it. So Waiwanan for asking me to watch Kiki Tien to speak a little bit. So Waiwanan.
Thank you so much, Luke, for sharing your language and for reminding us of how we are all connected, not only as people, but as part of our natural world. So thank you so very much for joining us.
Hello again, everybody. So next we're going to have a blueprint update, and we're going to have Betsy Galbraith from Fish and Wildlife Service, Green Bay Conservation Partner Blueprint Liaison, and Deputy Field Supervisor with Fish and Wildlife Service, and Bree Kupski from Green Bay Program. She's the Green Bay Program Coordinator with the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. They will be sharing an update on the Green Bay Landscape Blueprint and Implementation Plan. Take it away.
Thanks, Jim. Today I'm going to talk to you about an exciting new phase. The GBCP Landscape Blueprint will soon be entering. So as you may remember, thanks to all of you, the GBCP membership, the Blueprint Implementation Plan was finished several years ago with the goal of guiding collaborative conservation within the region. It was the work of over 50 different partner organizations, many teams, a steering committee, and lots of input over several years. The 5 key areas noted on the screen were developed and described within the plan in detail. Next slide, please. The Blueprint project also produced an interactive mapping tool and priority PDFs of maps that can be utilized by all of you, the partners that work within the area. We hope you'll find these tools useful when evaluating project opportunities, applying for grants, connecting with other conservation plans, or networking with other conservation organizations. And both the implementation plan for the blueprint and these interactive mapping tools can be found on the GBCP website under the Blueprint tab, and I'll drop a link in the chat after I'm done speaking this morning. Next slide, please. So the established Blueprint partnership and the planning effort has already developed outcomes for those 4 goal areas I showed you within the watershed footprint. So now we need to establish strategies to achieve those outcomes. And that's where the next phases of the project come in. The example goals you see here on the screen were developed for the habitat section of the implementation plan. So just showing you these here as a reference point. So now I'm going to turn it over to Bree Kupski with Wisconsin DNR, and she's going to be describing the partnership with Wisconsin DNR and the next phases of the project as we develop a framework to move the project forward. So take it away, Bree.
Thanks, Betsy. So for about the last year, DNR Office of Great Waters and Fish and Wildlife Service has been discussing what those next steps are for the blueprint planning and implementation. And one thing that we really kept coming back to is this idea of scaling up from the area of concern remedial action planning and implementation and down from the Lake-wide action and management plan or LAMP program priority setting for Lake Michigan. Something that we realized really early on is that the Lake Michigan LAMP program has some really specific goals and priorities included for Green Bay, but the issues in Green Bay are very unique to that of Lake Michigan and other areas of the Great Lakes. And we really need that more focused and tailored approach to addressing those natural resource issues in the Bay of Green Bay and its watershed, and identifying those actions to help achieve some of those outcomes that have already been identified in the blueprint. So one thing that we really wanted to see happen in future phases is actually to broaden the scope of where the blueprint effort has focused to date, which has really been within that Fox Wolf Basin and some of the Door Peninsula, and now to include all of the Green Bay watershed within Wisconsin so that we can capture some of the needs of the more northern areas in terms of protection and conservation efforts. So we really see this next phase of blueprint planning as a way to be more inclusive of conservation and restoration efforts in Northeast Wisconsin, to also provide that critical bridge between the area of concern, TMDL, LAMP program, and other planning and implementation efforts in the region, and as a means to answer questions and garner support from those who we really need to be bought into implementation of this plan, including policymakers, funders, community leaders and advocates, interest groups, etc. Next slide. So we've identified a critical next step to be development of this blueprint action implementation framework. This is a large area. There are a lot of components across the 5 key areas that we'd really like to strategically tie together in this planning effort that are going to need to be undertaken in phases just due to capacity and funding available to develop each one of those key area implementation plans, which makes this a pretty complex planning process overall. And we also wanted to ensure that this plan is, even though it's driven by those conservation goals, that at the end of the day, the recommendations it will encompass really aligns with the values and priorities of the watershed communities. So we can solicit all the support we can for implementation of the plan. So to try to make this next phase of the key area implementation plans as well coordinated as possible, Fish and Wildlife Service and DNR OGW, we teamed up to secure funding from GLRI and the Fund for Lake Michigan to actually hire a consultant to facilitate development of this framework in partnership with the Green Bay Conservation Partnership Network. So that will include a process for getting the outstanding parts of the watershed up to speed in terms of mapping conservation opportunities that Betsy talked about earlier, a process for defining those near-term and long-term actions within each key area, some stakeholder and general public engagement plans, and a facilitator's guide that outlines how to implement this framework across all the blueprint key areas, and sort of a facilitated annotated outline for how this is all coming together. Next slide. So going forward, this is our anticipated timeline. We expect to have a steering committee to guide the framework development kicked off sometime late this year, and for the final framework to be completed around mid-2024, and then by late 2024 to start implementing that planning framework through development of the action implementation plan for the Thriving Habitat Blueprint Key Area. As we work through the next couple of years, we're also going to be evaluating what funding sources and capacity partners have to begin development of the other Blueprint Key Area implementation plans. So with that, thank you to the steering committee for providing support for this next phase and continued commitment to use the blueprint as a guiding document for the Green Bay Conservation Partners. Going forward, we're going to be engaging GBCP members to participate in some groups associated with the action implementation framework phase, and we'll continue to provide updates on progress through GBCP events such as these. So thanks, hope you all looking forward to a great agenda today, and if you have questions, you can reach out to me or Betsy.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Betsy and Bree, for that, that blueprint update. So we're going to transition into the lightning talks now. So I'm going to just get going and introduce our first speaker. Our first talk is Soil Health Equipment and Demonstration Facility, or SHED. And the presenter is Jeremy Freund from Outagamie County Land and Water Conservation Department. Take it away, Jeremy.
All right, thank you, Jim. So Jim already took away my thunder with reading my slide for you, but essentially we got lucky. We have an acronym that not only works for what I'm about to talk about, but it's also stands for what we want to do. And that's we want to educate and demonstrate that soil health practices can work in Northeast Wisconsin and beyond. So the background picture here that you see, you can start seeing some striping from top to bottom. That's going to be the different plots I'm about to show you. Even from left to right above Outagamie, the word Outagamie, you can see the vegetation is different. So using drones, we can start seeing from above how effective different cover crops are, at growing and suppressing weeds and different things like that. Next slide, please. So the shed itself, so it's an acronym, but it's also a building. Right in the center, the location of this project is the county line. On the right there is County Trunk Highway U. So just on the east side of that line is Brown County, and we're just into Outagamie County. This land is owned by the United Nations. Jordan Court is the official address you would put in, Jordan Court, Oneida, Wisconsin, and it'll get you right to the site. But it took about 3 years, but we finally got our shed. And that picture in the middle is the shed itself. Within that shed is our soil health equipment we've gotten from GLRI grants, donations from folks like TNC, Foxbrook Watershed Alliance, and also it's going to house the United Nations interceder. So besides the shed and storing equipment, on the east end of the shed is a concrete floor for working on equipment, but also important here is the plots. So we have about 27 acres of farmland that we're using to demonstrate the soil health regenerative ag principle of continuous cover. So cover crop into a corn silage crop, and then no-till the following spring. And then we're also using manure to demonstrate that part of farming as low disturbance manure application at agronomic rates. So north of Jordan Court, currently these plots, the 9 plots are for corn silage, and the species and the experiments are chosen by a collaborative of folks like Lower Fox Demo Farms, private agronomists, county agronomists, farmers that can let us know what we're looking to try. What's a new herbicide? What's a new cover crop species? Things like that. Because our goal is dairy rotation, the bottom left is where we're currently growing different types of alfalfa. Pure alfalfa is kind of the control, but then we're also mixing in more of the regenerative ag combination of species, grass, brassica, and legumes. And the bottom right is another play area, we'll call it, but we're looking at plot 11 is diverse, those dozen different species of cover crops growing at one time to see the effects on soil health. But then as well, we're also looking at perennial cover. So maybe there's going to be a future where the farmer doesn't have to plant a cover crop each year. They're just planting into an existing cover. Next slide, please. So the education piece, basically it's meant to be, it's a public building because the county built it, and it's meant to be a place where farmers can, if they're shy, they can stop by and follow signs in the plots to learn what's happening, or we'll also hold events to educate people what's happening in the plots. Next slide, please. And this is my last slide. This is at harvest. You can see the chopper along the road and a wagon on the left. Basically, I want to walk you through quick the area. Now we're looking back east into Brown County. The bay is at the top of the picture. The corn silage is on the left being harvested. The top right, you can see the multi-species being a lush green. And then the other plots, this is kind of in the fall, so we're expecting things to be dying down. What's unique here is you can see the stripes within the corn. We're essentially taking the center of each plot. We're harvesting the corn silage with a local farmer. We're sending the sample off to be tested for feed quality for farmers, so we can start learning things about digestibility, milk per ton, and things like that with the different plots. We're also experimenting. What this also demonstrates is on the left, it looks brown. I promise you there's interseeded cover crops that have not responded yet because they're dormant. But on the in the corner between Jordan Court and you there, where it's greener, that's where we played with row spacing. And you can tell that sunlight promotes more growth. And we kind of know that, but we wanted to demonstrate that. And so you can see how much greener that is already at harvest. So different things we play with at these sites. So look forward to an invite, and thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you, Jeremy. Yeah, I got to get back out there and check it out. It's been a while. So it looks like we do have a question here. How are test plot projects determined each year?
Through the collaborative with that I mentioned with the area professionals and farmers that are interested.
And then one more quick one. Have you had farmers out to see these plots yet, and what do they think?
We had our first event this last fall. With the pandemic, we had to be careful with inviting people to basically show up. But yes, the vision is to have a self-guided signs and such so farmers can walk it when they want, but we also want to hold events to promote the site and soil health.
Excellent. All right, we're going to move on to the next talk, and that is PFAS levels in fish in Green Bay. And Sean Strom from the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources will be your speaker. Take it away, Sean.
Thanks. So just real quickly, a little history. The fish contaminants monitoring program has been in existence within the Wisconsin DNR for about 50 years, looking at a vast array of contaminants in fish. Most recently, PFAS. PFAS is an acronym, per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. It's considered kind of an emerging contaminant, but from our agency's perspective, it's really not new. It's been on our radar in both fish and wildlife since about 2007, and it's been a regular part of our contaminants monitoring routine sampling since about 2017. PFAS is kind of an umbrella term for thousands of different compounds. The most toxic and most bioaccumulative is perfluorooctane sulfonate, which is PFOS or PFOS, and that's what I'll be talking mostly about for the rest of my talk. All fish consumption advisories are based on levels of PFOS, PFOS. The potential adverse impacts of exposure include, there's a vast array, immune system impacts, increased cholesterol, increased risk of thyroid disease, hypertension, especially in pregnant women, and also some developmental issues as well. So what this map shows is areas that we have tested for PFAS and subsequent consumption advisories. So areas in green are locations that have been sampled for PFAS, but the results did not result in any PFAS-based advice. That doesn't mean that there isn't any consumption advisories. Other contaminants such as mercury or PCBs may have played a role, but the orange or yellowish water bodies are locations where the fish results resulted in PFAS-specific advice. So next slide. So this slide is PCB levels in Green Bay and associated tributaries. So when we set consumption advice, we include all associated tributaries up to the first dam. And so what you can see in terms of accumulation is that the highest levels are found in predator species or bottom feeders, so carp, muskie, trout, walleye. And you can see the number of species that are in the 1 meal per month advisory range. And so there are currently, these are the current advisories for these species and for Green Bay and all the associated tributaries. And I should make note that these consumption advisory ranges are kind of developed in conjunction with a group called the Great Lakes Consortium for Fish Consumption Advisories. And it's just a grouping of professionals within the Great Lakes states and the province of Ontario to develop best practices for various contaminants in fish. So the next slide. So this slide shows PFOS, again, PFOS levels in Green Bay and associated tributaries. And you can see there's a little bit of a difference in accumulation patterns. Smaller species, white bass, white perch, rock bass, all have elevated levels compared to some other species. The rock bass, which is the data bar in red, did result in a consumption advisory of no more than 1 meal per week for Green Bay and associated tributaries. These fish were collected from the Peshtigo River. All the other contaminant levels were below consumption advisory levels, and or PCB levels were more restrictive. So next slide. So the summary and the kind of the take home issue is that while we continue to monitor PFAS, PCBs are still the primary contaminant in fish from Green Bay. And this is an issue that we will keep monitoring into the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. It looks like we have a question. Is there a concern that PFAS move up the food chain into things like waterfowl?
Yes, we're working on that. We do know that bald eagles can accumulate fairly high levels of PFAS, and we are currently developing a plan to monitor PFAS in waterfowl, which will probably start next year.
Great, thank you very much. All right, we're going to move on to our next speaker. Maria Otto, City of Green Bay Parks, Recreation, and Forestry, is going to talk about building a Green Bay Conservation Corps.
Thanks, Jim. Like you mentioned, my name is Maria. I work for the City of Green Bay, and we are currently planning and building the Conservation Corps. Next slide, please. So our program design and our desired outcomes for this first program year. So back in March, the city applied for an AmeriCorps grant. So this AmeriCorps grant, along with city funding, will help create the Green Bay Conservation Corps. Now, this program is pretty unique. It will be the only municipality-based program in the state of Wisconsin. It also is only the second conservation-focused AmeriCorps program in the state of Wisconsin. So a pretty unique design, something that's not done. And we're kind of planning to make it an implemented program within the city for a long period of time. So this first program year will start in September and run through August. The AmeriCorps grant is a 3-year grant cycle, and you reapply every 3 years. Like I mentioned, the city of Green Bay does intend to make this a long-term program and kind of make it the new normal within the city. Like I mentioned, the Green Bay Conservation Corps will be funded by AmeriCorps and the city. However, we are always looking for partners to help us fund specific projects, such as native plantings in a certain area or replacing boardwalks. Currently, for this first program year, we are partnered with the Baird Creek Preservation Foundation, as well as the Western Great Lakes Bird and Bat Observatory. And those are going to help us implement specific projects. Like its name suggests, the Green Bay Conservation Corps, its goal is to restore and conserve the city of Green Bay parks and greenways. Currently, the city manages about 2,658 acres, and there are plans to expand this in the next few years. Currently, the city only has about 22 park maintenance staff, and those are the people that are actually out maintaining these parks. So with this grant, we're looking to bring on an additional 21 members. These members would be AmeriCorps members, and we're looking to have 6 full-time members start in the fall in September, and then bring an additional 15 members on in the summer of 2023. Our desired outcomes for this first program year include improving trail systems, restoring habitats, mapping and surveying the parks and greenways, and then planning community events. So we're looking to improve 2 miles of trails, which would include boardwalk replacements and improvements, as well as erosion control along trails. We're looking to restore 75 acres. This primarily includes invasive species removal, native plant establishment, and tree plantings. And then we are mapping and surveying the Green Bay parks and greenways in order to prioritize future projects and then the projects with the highest need. With that survey effort, we are going to start surveying for anurans, so frog and toad surveys on the parks where there are wetlands and along the coast. And this is kind of just to get a baseline and also to help members get trained and learn survey methods. For community events, we're looking to host 5 large volunteer events throughout the year, and then also 4 educational programs that would be free to the public. Next slide, please. So since we are starting this September, we are currently recruiting. So this is kind of my shameless little plug. AmeriCorps members for this program can be anyone 17 years or older. They do not have to have any prior experience. So this is really geared towards people graduating from high school or college students who want to take a gap year, but it's also for people of all ages. So if somebody has some extra time and wants to become a member. Members do receive a living allowance, healthcare insurance, childcare allowance, and then at the end of their term of service, they do become eligible for an education award, which is about $6,000. Next slide, please. So the city is very excited to have such a unique program, start doing some conservation work on city parks and within an urban area. We're really hoping this program can help tie together all the conservation projects that are happening in the greater Green Bay area. And hopefully we'll be back next year to tell you the year 1 results. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. So we have a question here. Will the Anurin survey be incorporated into the DNR frog and toad study or the marsh monitoring program?
So as far as the locations, some of them will be, some of them are really just kind of like practice sites for the AmeriCorps members. Since these people will be coming in with no experience, it's kind of just to get them experience in survey methods. But we do plan to do some surveys at Kenyers Nature Center, which is along the coast and is technically a coastal wetland. And so sites that like that, so priority sites and the wildlife sanctuary, those will be added in.
Okay, thank you. And then you kind of told us how folks could get involved, but what kind of help do you need or could you get from the Green Bay Conservation Partner members?
So We're always looking for volunteers. I mentioned that we will be planning 5 large events, but we also plan individual events. So if a small group or an individual wants to volunteer, we do have projects that they can help come out with the Conservation Corps, or even just plan a small group to go out. This Saturday, we are planning a volunteer event to pick up some trash along the shoreline at Kenyers. So that's going to be a smaller event. So volunteers is the number one, but then also different grants and different sources of funding for the native plants or donations of equipment.
Okay, thank you. All right, we're going to move on. Our next speaker is Dr. Robert Howe at the UW Green Bay Conference Center for Biodiversity. The talk is going to be on the ecology of piscivorous birds in the lower Green Bay ecosystem. Take it away, Bob.
Thanks, Jim. I'm going to share some details and preliminary results from this ambitious project funded by a UWC grant and the Conference Center for Biodiversity at UW Green Bay, and with important contributions by many people, several of whom I'm going to recognize here initially. The project is led by Amy Wolf and myself, and Aaron Giese is the leader of the data management and some of the field work. Brian Door is one of North America's experts in double-crested cormorants and American white pelicans. He is at USDA Wildlife Services and Mississippi State University. Brad Smith from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is leading the fish aspects of the project. Josh Martinez from the Wisconsin DNR is helping with logistics. We have some fantastic graduate students, Jacob Wolf and Brandon Byrne, who are a part of this project, and about 20 other UW Green Bay students and volunteers are involved with the project. And we have many other supporters, including the Army Corps of Engineers, the Port of Green Bay, and others. So the project consists of biweekly surveys using drones and direct observers of the piscivorous birds in the lower Green Bay ecosystem from near Sturgeon Bay all the way up along the west shore of Green Bay to Oconto. We also are using telemetry and the cell network to track movements with GPS transmitters of pelicans and cormorants. We will have about 60 birds that we're going to be following if everything goes well. We're also looking at an analysis of diet through direct observation and analysis of regurgitants. And then Brad is leading the fish surveys, which will give us an idea about where the fish are hanging out. So next slide, please. The preliminary results are, I think, stunning or interesting to me anyway. They really justify characterizing this lower Green Bay ecosystem as the Serengeti of Lake Michigan. There are at least 18 species of fish-eating birds that nest here. The two dominant species are the cormorant, double-crested cormorant, American white pelican. But there are many other species of residents, and then of course there are hundreds of thousands of migratory waterfowl that use this system. So it's an extremely productive system. The Cat Island Restoration Project has provided an opportunity for nesting of many of these birds, and that has led to really, I think, a spectacular increase in numbers of these birds. Next slide. So the question arises then: how do these many birds impact the system? Well, we have just like the Serengeti, we have a whole range of different ecological niches used by these birds. There are kleptoparasites, there are scavengers, there are predators. It's a really diverse and productive, extremely productive ecosystem. If we do a back of the napkin calculation, we know how much cormorants eat in a day and pelicans eat in a day. The total consumption of fish of these birds, just the dominant ones, is something like 21,000 pounds every single day during the summer. And then during the fall, we have an increase in numbers up to around 13,000 double-crested cormorants in late August and September. So the number increases even more. So on the surface anyway, you would think that this is going to severely impact the fish population in the bay, and that's certainly possible. Next slide, please. But what we are learning from the telemetry studies is that these birds have a really wide geographic range. So what you see in this picture are telemetry locations for cormorants during part of last summer, and you can see that from their nesting colonies in the lower bay, they're moving sometimes on a daily basis into the Lake Winnebago system, all the way up into Door County. They have various feeding areas along the east and west shore of Green Bay, and so there's a really big geographic area that is a part of this system, and the impacts are spread out over that very large area as well. Luke earlier talked about a fish garden, and I like to think of Lower Green Bay as being a kind of natural fish garden. It's productive, extremely productive, partly due to eutrophication, but I think the paradigm of this as an area of toxins and dead zones has to be, I think, modified by the fact that we have an incredible ecosystem of piscivorous birds that is exploiting this system.
All right, thanks, Bob. You kind of covered it as far as the spatial, the distribution of these birds, but as far as that impact of 21,000 pounds of fish every day, how does that compare with recreational and commercial fishermen?
I don't have an answer to that. That's one of the questions that we're going to be asking. But of course, the numbers of different kinds of fish taken by cormorants and pelicans is much broader than the fishing take, which focuses on a small number of sport fish.
Right.
So yeah, I don't have a good answer, but it's one of the questions we're asking.
Okay, thank you. All right, we'll go on to the next speaker is Carrie Hagenow from the Nature Conservancy, and she's going to talk about controlling reed canary grass when endangered species are present. Take it away, Carrie.
All right, thank you, Jim. And as Jim said, I'm Carrie Hagenow. I am the Door Peninsula land steward for the Nature Conservancy out of Sturgeon Bay. And what I'm going to talk about today is really a story about the insect that's pictured here. And this is not its glamorous adult stage, but this is the larval stage of the federally endangered Heinz emerald dragonfly. And that's a species that was actually thought to be extinct until it was rediscovered in the late 80s. And today it's found in 4 states, with Door County hosting the greatest abundance of the species. And it lives in calcareous spring-fed wetlands. So we know that groundwater quality is really critical for this species. And the larvae that you're looking at will live in the water for up to 5 years, where they feed on aquatic insects and they'll molt numerous times. And really interestingly, they utilize the burrows of crayfish to overwinter and survive periods of drought within those wetlands. Next slide. So where things get kind of complicated for me as a land manager is when we have a major breeding site for the Heinz that is being overrun by an invasive species, in this case, that canary grass. And the site you're looking at is the headwater wetlands of Pile Creek in Bailey's Harbor, which is one of our most productive breeding sites for the species. If you take nothing else away from my 5 minutes, know this: we try to use science to guide our work related to land management, especially when endangered species are involved. And you have to take a long-term outlook. So there's a lot of steps I'm going to talk about, and we can't just say, okay, today we're going to kill reed canary grass here at the site. So what you're looking at here is a portion of 10 experimental blocks, kind of the PVC pipe that you see there, laid out in 2010 within the breeding site. And this study was conducted by Dan Sullick out of the University of South Dakota. He was looking at several factors. So Heinz emerald dragonfly larval growth rate as an indicator of habitat quality, Heinz larval abundance and the impacts from an herbicide application on that, and the impact of reed canary grass on the Heinz, or more specifically, crayfish burrow density, among other things. Baseline data was collected from plots within each of these experimental blocks prior to the application of herbicide. So there you see one of our colleagues carrying the plot doing the sampling. Fusilade was the herbicide that was chosen, and that was chosen because it's a grass-specific herbicide and had the potential to be broadcast sprayed without impacting our native vegetation at the site. All of this research that you're kind of looking at laid out in this picture coincided with a toxicity study with the herbicides Roundup and Fusilade that measured the survival, the larval mass, feeding rates, and behavioral response of the Heinz emerald dragonfly larva under 3 different levels of the 2 herbicides. So these studies left us with a few takeaways for management. There were differences in the density of crayfish burrows and the use by the Heinz in areas of very dense reed canary grass. So that justified our further management. And there was no direct impacts on the survival of the Heinz with herbicide related to those toxicity studies, but not without some concerns over sublethal impacts on growth rate and feeding. So continued research needed or ongoing there. Next slide. So ultimately, after the study was complete, we moved forward with herbicide treatments to control reed canary grass at the site. And we quickly found out that we couldn't use Fusilade as we intended since it's not aquatic approved. The treatments began in 2014, and those first years, the site was very wet and never actually dried up enough to use within the breeding area where the density of reed canary grass was most appropriate for a grass-specific herbicide. So, the use of that herbicide was really reliant on dry conditions. So instead, we moved forward using Rodeo, an aquatic approved formulation of glyphosate. And the methods across the site really varied greatly, with hand swiping of individual stems occurring in the breeding area, about 1 acre, spot spraying on 9 acres, and broadcast spraying across about 3 acres. I should also note we have a Section 7 agreement with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that outlines what's allowable and all the precautions that have to be taken at this site and within other critical Heinz habitat. So really quickly, if we take a look at this picture before we go to the last slide, you'll note that most of what you see is canary grass with the head sticking up. And this was a really dense area near our trail. Next slide. All right, so this is that same area in 2020. After consistently treating the site for 7 years using what we learned from the studies and paired with careful herbicide application methods, the difference is pretty drastic. Here you can see an abundance of bulrush behind Dan, our researcher from South Dakota. Native vegetation is thriving in areas that were primarily reed canary grass, and we haven't actually had to do any native planting, which we envisioned. We continue to treat this site annually, and we usually try to hit a window in the fall when the native vegetation has senesced. And with that, I've tried to summarize a decade of work in 5 minutes. And again, the takeaways are really, we use science to guide land management decisions, and it's okay to take time to make those decisions, and you need to, especially when endangered species are involved.
Thank you very much. I think you, let's see, I think we answered that question. I think we're good to go. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We are going to go to our final speaker of the round, which is Amanda Smith from the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. And she's going to talk about European frogbit, a new aquatic plant in Green Bay. Take it away, Amanda. Thank you.
All right, thanks. So this is European frogbit, or Hydrocharis morsus rene. It's a free-floating plant with leaves that are heart-shaped or slightly circular and arranged in sort of a rosette. What distinguishes it from many native floating leaf species that we have here in Wisconsin with similar leaf shape is the size. Frogbit is quite small, ranging from about 1/2 inch to 2.5 inches in diameter. It can reproduce via seeds and clonal daughter plants, but what allows it to persist over the winter is its ability to produce what are called turions. And these detach from the stolons in the fall, overwinter on the substrate, and then in the spring and early summer, rise to the surface to germinate into new plants. Next slide. So in Wisconsin, it is considered an NR40 prohibited species, NR40 being the invasive species law in our state that makes it illegal to transport, possess, transfer, or introduce a prohibited species without a permit. So pretty serious and for good reason. As you can see from this slide, the invasive hallmark of European frogbit is that it can form these dense, entangled floating mats that cover the surface of the water. So you can begin to infer why this plant can become a problem for things like recreation, industry, and the overall ecology of the system. Next. So the first sighting in Wisconsin was reported in late summer 2021 in Oconto County by a botanist who was actually doing a survey for the Great Lakes Coastal Wetland Monitoring Program. And immediately following the report, a response team formed. And naturally, our first priority was to get out on the landscape to gauge the extent of the infestation. And this is the map that we generated. The green lines represent places that we monitored but did not find any frogbit. The purple represents areas where we weren't able to fully monitor, but very much so expect to find frogbit there this year. And then the remaining colored lines represent presence of frogbit and the estimated density. So you can see that the general infestation stretches from the northeast corner of Marinette County all the way south to the city of Oconto. That's about 23 miles or so of coast, including an estimated 50 acres across 3 state natural areas, 2 units of the DNR West Shore Wildlife Area, and then 16 or so public tributaries, wetlands, and right-of-ways. Next. So what's being done about it? Over the fall and winter, the team worked to draft a management plan. It's a holistic and proactive management plan to address not only the known populations, but also to protect the greater Green Bay coastal areas of Wisconsin that are currently uninfested. And we've organized the plan around these 4 goal areas on the left. In terms of prevention, we have a lot of great outreach programming and projects being led by the local lake monitoring and protection network coordinators. And those include Derek Thorne, Chris Acey, Jake Devine, and Sam Coyan. Early detection monitoring, as we all know, is critical in the overall containment of this population and is really going to be most cost effective in the long term. And so that said, the team has identified over 150 sites throughout the Bay and beyond that we're going to try to monitor. And then in terms of control, the department obtained GLRI funding to contract out herbicide treatment of the larger monoculture patches. And then this funding also allows for Oconto and Marinette County conservation departments to hire summer techs to do some manual removal of the smaller, less dense patches. And then these staff will also be doing early detection surveys, as well as clean boats, clean waters, watercraft inspections in their respective counties. In terms of research, in the future, we'd like to support and collaborate with a university or other organization like the NER, the Future NER, to fill knowledge gaps on the species and learn about how this new species might be impacting the Green Bay estuary. So that's the plan for this year. The team is really focused on getting this first full year of frogbit in Wisconsin under our belts, and we're hoping to accomplish as much as possible, but also go about it in a strategic way and learn a lot in doing so. Ways that you can help, keep a lookout for it during your field work. And if you think you come across a new population, snap a photo, or better yet, grab a specimen and get in contact with me right away. Thanks.
Thanks, Amanda. So a question is, can European frogbit grow in calm waters and waters with wave action, or does it prefer which of those two? Like in your surveys, it focused on river mouse, but maybe also coastal shoreline?
Yeah, great question. It really is a niche species for these calm, kind of secluded areas. It can grow in some flow, but it is a floating plant, so it'll float to those calm little habitats and kind of situate itself there. So yeah.
All right, thank you. And thanks to all of our first round of speakers. We're going to go into a break now, and there's going to be a short audience poll. so we can hear from you. Please answer the questions and take a short break, and we'll share the poll results during the final minutes of our break. Thank you.
All right. Answers up. All right. So if you're out there, I'm going to go through the poll questions and you can see if you're right. So the first one had no right or wrong answers. It's a would you rather question, but over half of us would rather be outside when it's sunny and hot. So your time is coming. For those that prefer calm and cold, I think today we have cold, but maybe not so calm. So happy to see that nobody picked I'll stay inside, please. So we've got a good outdoor crowd. All right, the second question was about what Wisconsin city became the first in the US to adopt No Mow May. And while we had a variety of answers, Appleton does get the recognition for being that first city in the US, and many other cities are also starting to adopt No Mow May. Researchers found 5 times more bees in the unmowed areas, and the Appleton City Council voted last month to make it a permanent initiative. And as I said, there's more than a dozen other Wisconsin communities that are adopting No Mow Mays as well. All right, the third question was about the partnership with the Oneida Nation and Northeast Wisconsin Audubon volunteers. We did have some smart folks. It was on the high end, and 118 was the correct answer. And I said in a great presentation, Randy Cornelius, who's a cultural representative of the tribe, shared with volunteers the Oneida story of how birds get their song. And even with song, birds don't have a voice. And so Randy Cornelius shared, in our teachings, it tells us we are the voice and we are instructed to always watch over the birds. And then our last one, if you were lucky enough to see the Green Bay Botanical Washed Ashore exhibit, you are correct that Stanley the sturgeon was one of the Wisconsin animals featured there. We do have someone thinking sharks are in our Wisconsin waters. So Stanley the sturgeon was correct. Unfortunately, they did not have a rainbow mussel or a pike, though they could have. There was another Wisconsin animal that was featured as part of that exhibit, Gyocometi the river otter. But Stanley the sturgeon was there. And the Washed Ashore project was created from tons of plastic marine debris removed from beaches, including bottles and jugs, bottle caps, sand shovels, flip-flops, and combs. So as we think about Earth Day and people are getting out to clean up as the snow melts and spring is here, we try to do our part to make sure we have a clean environment. All right, back over to you, Jim.
All right, thank you, Nicole.
Thanks, everybody.
Ding, ding, next round. By the way, when we return in person, you'll be hearing the cowbell again. So our next round of lightning talks, we're going to start out with monitoring phosphates in real time at the mouth of the Fox River. And that's brought to you by Sarah Bartlett from New Water. Take it away.
Thanks, Jim. So hopefully many, if not all of you, know that New Water, the wastewater treatment plant in Green Bay, has one of the longest monitoring programs of all of the Great Lakes. So we're always really proud to kind of hold that. And as part of our monitoring program, not only do we measure for a suite of nutrients and other water quality parameters in the bay, we also maintain 2 water quality monitoring stations. One site is about 8 miles north of the mouth of the Fox River. So this image right here is a bit dated. This is the Polium plant that no longer exists on the left-hand side. However, right here at the mouth of the Fox River, we've got our 1 station entrance light, which, as I mentioned, is about 8 miles north. That station has been last year upgraded to be a buoy platform, which means that those data are going to be available in real time for public consumption. And then the other station is, you probably cannot see my cursor, but there is a cement station in the middle of this brown plume in the Fox River. And that is the location of the Fox River Station, appropriately named. And we have maintained this station as a continuous monitoring, which means that the data are collected and then looked at seasonally. So the equipment just is left out and then you really can't look at it in real time. So next slide, please. We received a grant from GLOS, the Great Lakes Observing System, to upgrade that station. And along with upgrading it, we will be able to bring it into real time. And that also will allow us to let recreators and the general public see some of these water quality parameters as they are recorded. And what's really exciting about the grant also is that it did fund a phosphate. I'm calling it sensor for lack of better terms, but it's better than a sensor because we can now measure phosphate in the field with wet chemistry, which is pretty much the creme de la creme. It's going to be a lot better than kind of relying on a sensor. It's actually using some reagents. So if you're familiar with how to measure phosphate, hopefully you are just as excited as we are about this piece of equipment. So the equipment, along with this phosphate sensor, some sondes that'll measure water temperature, dissolved oxygen. We're also going to have some sensors to look at some pigments such as chlorophyll and phycocyanin, so your blue-green algae indicator. We also are going to have a weather station at this site as well. So hopefully these pieces of equipment are going to be deployed in the next couple of weeks, despite having ice off early this year. Because the phosphate equipment does rely on wet chemistry, we kind of are waiting for some temperature. We can't have it be freezing out there. So hopefully we can get these things deployed soon. Data will be available on New Water's website, and we will also have these data available on GLOS's website. So expect an email to come through. We'll push something out through the Green Bay Conservation Partners listserv with links to see these data in real time, not only for this station at the mouth of the Fox River, but also for our station at Entrance Light, in case you are interested. Next, please. As I mentioned, New Water has been monitoring long-term some phosphorus data. We've started measuring for phosphorus back in 1986. And so we look at total phosphorus, which a lot of people talk about, but then there's also phosphate, which is, you know, more readily available for plants as well as harmful, or can, I should say, plants and algae, blue-green algae, they can take it up a little bit more readily. So you can look at phosphate kind of as a proxy for how much, what kind of nutrients are available for some of our aquatic plants and bacteria and organisms to use. And so that's kind of why we're interested in having this phosphate sensor here at the mouth of the Fox River. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned, you know, having that information, we know that we've got some events that are seasonally driven, whether it's ice off at the beginning of the year, bringing in a bunch of nutrients and sediment into the lower bay. That also brings with it a lot of nutrients. And so we know that we get these events not just in the spring, but throughout the growing season. So having phosphate data readily available throughout the growing season. This equipment is located at this cement station. Here's just an overview of the bay, and it will take a phosphate measurement once per hour. So stay tuned for an email, and hopefully everyone is just as excited as we are to have this really exciting information updated on a very high frequency.
Thank you, Sarah. Let's see here. Yeah, how will you, you mentioned a little bit on this, but how will the data be used in predicting harmful algal blooms?
There's a lot of work in Lower Green Bay right now, some other buoys that are that have been deployed. And so we've been, we're hoping that this phosphate data can kind of play into a model that is being worked on by UW-Milwaukee, UW Green Bay, the Wisconsin DNR. So we're hoping to have this information can help in that model to help us just better predict if and when the blooms are gonna be here in the lower bay.
And then real quick, so a lot of us are familiar with the total phosphorus limit or guidance level that's identified in the TMDL. Is there a similar limit for phosphates?
There is not.
Okay.
To my knowledge, I'm not sure how or if there was interest in a phosphate limit, but for right now, the efforts in general are just for total phosphorus.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So our next presentation is enhancement of the Great Lakes spotted muskellunge population in Green Bay and its tributaries by Jason Briegeman from the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. Take it away, Jason.
All right, thanks, Jim. I want to start by acknowledging some of our partners and funding sources that have made some of the more recent stocking initiatives that I'm going to highlight possible, and those include NRDA, the Michigan DNR, the Wisconsin Muskie Alliance, and Titletown Muskies, Inc. And so, as most of us are aware, Green Bay and its tributaries experienced some severe stressors in the early to mid 1900s, including habitat loss, declines in water quality, invasive species, and intense fishing pressure. And these stressors resulted in either the significant declines or extirpations of many of our popular sport fish species in Green Bay and its tributaries, including the extirpation of the Great Lakes spotted muskies from the system. Next slide, please. Starting in the 1980s, the Wisconsin DNR and other partners initiated a muskie restoration project. And the primary tool that they were going to use to restore muskie populations was stocking. And so this plot shows the number of muskies that have been stocked in Green Bay and its tributaries every year going back to 1989, when the first muskies were stocked. And the hope was in the 80s that they could stock enough muskies to get a high enough density of adults out there that the population would begin to reproduce naturally and eventually would become self-sustaining, meaning we would no longer have to stock to sustain the fishery or the population. And to date, we've documented very little natural reproduction. So our stocking efforts have continued to try to restore the muskie population in the Green Bay and its tributaries. And we've stocked two different age classes of muskies throughout time. The blue bars are fingerling muskies, and fingerlings are typically stocked in the fall when they're about 6 months old and 10 to 12 inches. And yearling muskies, which are held in our hatchery system for a longer period of time, usually until they're 15 to 18 months old and much larger, anywhere from 12 to 18 inches. So as you can see, based on the graph, starting in 2015, we switched over to stocking a much higher number of yearlings compared to previous years. And the hope was that by stocking more of these larger yearlings, we'd be able to have, or these fish would have much better survival, and we'd be able to get more adults out in the population. And also, if you look in the far right, in 2021, you can see a fairly large increase in the number of fingerlings that the DNR has stocked. And between 2010 and 2020, Besedny Fish Hatchery was the only hatchery that the DNR was raising fingerling muskies at. But starting in 2021, we switched over to raising muskies at both Besedny Anadromous Fish Hatchery as well as Wild Rose Fish Hatchery. And by adding another hatchery, we were able to greatly increase the number of fingerlings that we can raise and stock in Wisconsin. So, between 2010 and 2020, we were averaging about 3,000 to 5,000 fingerlings per year. And this past year, we stocked over 15,000. And we are also now able to provide Great Lakes spotted muskies for all systems, including our inland lakes within the Lake Michigan drainage. So it's greatly increased our capacity to raise Great Lakes spotted muskies. Next slide, please. We've also partnered with the Michigan DNR to try to increase the genetic diversity of the muskie population in Green Bay and its tributaries. And to do this, each spring, the Michigan DNR collects gametes from fish, wild fish in Lake St. Clair and the Detroit River, and raises them until they're small fingerlings, transfers them to the Wisconsin DNR, and we raise them till yearlings and then stock them out. So we're hopefully increasing the genetic diversity by stocking fish from a population outside of Green Bay and its tributaries to bring in new genetic diversity to hopefully increase survival and adaptability of that population. Next slide, please. And last, we are also working to get adult populations established in 3 broodstock lakes by stocking yearling muskies in these lakes every year. Stocking started in 2009, and hopefully in the next year or two, we'll be able to use these as our own source of brood stock, and all the fish stocked in these have come from the Detroit River system. So hopefully have the maximum genetic diversity. Again, so if we use these, we'll be able to enhance or use these as broodstock lakes, we'll be able to enhance the Green Bay fishery even more. So that's it.
Thank you, Jason. So with reestablishing these populations, is habitat a limiting factor at all in the Bay?
Habitat is likely a limiting factor. They've done some research, or the DNR has partnered with Wisconsin or University of Wisconsin Stevens Point to evaluate natural reproduction in the systems, and they were monitoring, spawning locations of muskies in the Bay and its tributaries. And what they found was that muskies were spawning and releasing eggs, but those eggs don't appear to be surviving at a high enough rate to establish a population. And habitat is one of the potential, especially a lack of nursery habitat is one of the potential reasons why they're not surviving. So there's a lot of projects going on with the AOC restoration projects and things that are hopefully going to increase spawning habitat and nursery habitat in the future.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let's see. I think we are set with that. Okay, we're going to go to our next speaker, Mary Smythe from Door County Climate Change Coalition. Let's collaborate for success, working with farmers to address climate change. Take it away, Mary.
Thank you very much. CCC will be 10 years old this year. Our mission is to provide free science-based educational opportunities to the public and inspire action to mitigate the climate crisis. Were we to name ourselves today, we would more likely be the Climate Crisis Coalition. From the beginning, we have been steadfastly nonpartisan as we targeted various community sectors, businesses, schools, environmental and civic groups, libraries, municipalities, churches, and medical providers, with presentations about climate change science, impacts, and strategy for mitigation and adaptation. Next slide. Participatory action is our other emphasis, holding science workshops, donating climate change books to all Door County libraries, semi-annual tree plantings, over 40,000 to date, and sponsoring field trips with an emphasis on climate change effects on the land, plants, and animals. Last fall, our coalition steering committee decided to add another community action, our local agricultural community, large and small, organic and non-organic dairy and produce farmers who are practicing regenerative agriculture. What led us to this decision? Third slide, next. First, because collaborating across a wide spectrum of interests is vital in addressing the all-encompassing nature of the climate crisis. And second, because Drawdown, a book whose subtitle is The Most Comprehensive Plan Ever Proposed to Reverse Global Warming, lists 80 solutions. In the first 20, 10 relate to agriculture and forestry, including silvopasture, regenerative agriculture, conservation agriculture, and managed grazing. Number 23 is farmland restoration, and number 30 is large methane digesters. No one on our steering committee has an agricultural background, and so how to begin? One of our steering committee members had gone to an event at Bry Cycle Farm in Southern Door, and he suggested that Lauren Bry might be able to help. Did she ever? Lauren linked us to Whitney Presby and Jamie Patton of UW-Madison and Extension, and to the members of Peninsula Pride Farms. Kinnard and Bry Cycle Farms invited CCCers to take farm tours and to attend a Peninsula Pride Farms meeting. Before each tour, participants agreed we were there to respectfully learn and to explore developing a partnership to spread the word about regenerative agriculture. PPF board members asked what we wanted. Our response was to learn about regenerative agriculture projects in our region, to build a working relationship with them, and specifically to invite PPF to participate in an agricultural panel about regenerative agriculture at a CCC public meeting in January. They agreed. With Lauren Bry and Whitney Presby, we created a program, Soil Health and the Benefits of Regenerative Agriculture, with 4 panelists and moderated by soil expert Jamie Patton. I called friends who are leaders of our local environmental groups to tell them about the panel, the reasons we chose the 4 panelists, and to invite them to attend. That outreach was very helpful. 130 attended the panel event by Zoom and in person. To those who asked why CCC was including factory farmers, we responded, CCC works to bring disparate voices to the discussion on climate change solutions. Farmers are in a unique position to sequester carbon into the soil, thus playing a key role in addressing climate change. It is encouraging that the majority of the feedback before and after was affirmative. CCC is now viewed as being eager to engage in educating about regenerative agriculture practices that are part of the solution for the world's climate crisis. Next slide, please. In 2022, CCC will be partnering with more than 70 groups to present field trips and programs. 3 programs will feature water, soil, and climate communication. All ag panelists got a copy of Catherine Hayhoe's book, Saving Us, a climate scientist's case for hope and healing in a divided world. We are learning from each other. At the PPF annual meeting in Kewanee, Lee Kinnard thanks CCC for reaching out to PPF, said our outreach had had an energizing effect on PPF members as they worked on regenerative agriculture. Those were generous, and supportive words. The latest benefit of our interactions was learning about PPF's directory of members who will share their equipment with other farmer members who need help expanding their own regenerative practices. We have to be in conversation with one another. This new collaboration with our agriculture community gives us hope that we can join with ever more partners in the critical work of addressing the climate crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Just one quick question here. So what surprised you most in your work with farmers on working on climate change?
What surprised us most? I think the extensiveness of the work that's already going on. It was impressive to learn about the demonstration farms and to hear the Bryes talk about their neighbors are adopting the practices as they see them working for them. I think that's just really exciting information.
Excellent, thank you. All right, Jason Petrella from Brown County Parks is up next to talk about Barkhausen property expansion. New land means new opportunities. Take it away, Jason.
All right. Yeah, thanks for having me. So yeah, I work mostly at Barkhausen Waterfowl Preserve and really take care of a lot of natural resources for the whole Brown County Park system. And recently here at Barkhausen, we were fortunate to receive an additional part of land that was adjacent to the existing Barkhausen property. It was 920 acres Barkhausen originally, with about 9 miles of trails for cross-country skiing, hiking, and snowshoeing, and nature center for environmental programs and other events. In 2018, Wisconsin Public Service donated about 80 acres of property just in the adjacent north end of the property here to the Barkhausen. So now we're up to 1,000 acres. Well, with this new land meant new opportunities, new things we could do out there. So one of the things that we did, and we worked with Ducks Unlimited quite a bit, was to do some habitat improvements in that particular area of land. And so if you go to the next slide, you'll see primarily area was farmed. Most of it was farmed. It was a little section of hardwood swamp area, but most of it was farmed. It would flood seasonally quite a bit. You can kind of see that in the picture, that one on the left there, how it flooded up. And it was used by a wide variety of species, waterfowl, variety of wildlife. There's really good flora and fauna out there as well. One of the more unusual visitors we had one year was a Eurasian widgeon, which is pretty cool to see out there. So it's already getting utilized quite a bit, especially by the waterfowl. So, but there's opportunity to do some improvements. So again, working with Ducks Limited, they're the ones who really fund this project, designed it. We are able to create some different wetland types out there, habitats. And you can see that in the picture on the right. That was after the work was completed. And some of the wetlands are going to be a little shallower, more of like a wet meadow. Most of that kind of is a wet meadow already. But some of the little deeper ponds, we're talking deep, like maybe 3 to 5 feet deep, not very deep, but a little bit deeper ponds. So it has a nice variety of wetland areas. You got a little wetland swamp, some wetland wet meadow, and again, some of the ponds. And kind of the picture there, if you see that little picture of the northern pike, a couple of pike spawning marshes were added in as well. They tie into a little tributary that goes out to the bay, and a couple of small parking areas to allow for public access. In addition to that, there's also an elevated platform. It only gets you up like 2 feet, but it's enough where it could be, get you a little bit of view out and this new work being done, but also be accessible for wheelchairs. And inside this little covered elevated platform, which was funded through a grant through the Fox Region Community Foundation, is that there's 2 scopes in there. So you can get out there and look out and see some of the waterfowl and other species of birds. One of the scopes is actually wheelchair accessible. So with these wetlands being there's different varieties and types, it also gave us the opportunity now to do some wetland planting. Those deeper ponds were pretty much bare sand after construction was done. So we worked with Green Bay Duck Hunter Association, Brown County Conservation Alliance also helped fund some wetland plants that were planted out there last year, put a little variety, some bulrush and some arrow arum and also some duck potato. And we got those planted out there and some of those areas are bare. So it's almost like I had a blank slate to work with. And again, it's a great opportunity to get some native vegetation established for the benefit of waterfowl and other species. So they did those plantings this past year. They're going to be doing some more this upcoming year. We're going to continue that going forward to really maximize the quality of these wetlands. In addition to that, we also have the Great Lakes Explorers, which are an elementary group of students that came out there this past fall. And out there, they're able to do some work out there. So actually, if you go to the next slide, they came out there and they were able to build some wood duck boxes, one of the Rotary chapters in our area. They worked with Amy quite a bit with a wild rice restoration project, kind of learned about that out here at the site, but also got to participate in planting some wild rice seed out there. So some of those wetlands were planted wild rice. We're hoping to continue that as well. And so they got to get some hands-on experience, see this property and get actually some experience working on this. And we're going to be doing more programs. Again, there's so many opportunities with this. It's almost like a blank slate in some regards, where not only just habitat improvements being done, but working with the community to get them involved as well. I had Eagle Scouts did some projects out there. I got more projects. If anybody has Eagle Scouts interest, I got more out there. But really try to like maximize the quality of this area. You know, it already was pretty really nice area, even though it was farm, but there's a lot of waterfowl that use that quite a bit. But one of the big things with this property I should mention too is that surrounding it is a lot of residential lots. So the really main reason this is donated to us is to keep it from getting developed. So now it's going to be preserved forever as habitat for wildlife. It's not going to get developed ever. And one of the really important things I think about this is that it's going to be given a chance to get the community involved and get that connection not only to these wetlands, but really the natural environment here in Brown County and throughout. And so we're really grateful for this opportunity. We're excited about some of the things that are going to be coming up in the future and how we can more learn from it. And again, get that community involvement. If you're ever in the area, come by and check it out. There's no established trails in it yet, or maybe do those in the future, but it's a great place to go snowshoeing if you want to check it out. But we're really excited about things that's going to be coming up and working with the various groups and getting that community involvement into this site and then beyond that. I think that's what I got. That's our little platform with the scopes.
Cool. Thank you, Jason. Let's see. So question, are water levels controlled in the wetlands and ponds?
There are 2 water control structures, so we could drain them or hold water back in them. I don't have any way to add water to them, but I could drain them if we want to do some management for vegetation or just hold it in. So some pike came up this year. I know some of us probably didn't like all that rain in March, but I tell you what, the pike and waterfowl loved it. They were able to get in some spots, so we can drain them or hold water in them as we want to.
Okay. And then let's see, are there plans for a habitat buffer around the wetland areas, for example, in the northern area of the property?
Yeah, right around those ponds, there's a lot of wet meadows and even some like little sedges popped up in areas. So it's not like houses and then there's a wetland directly. There's a nice little buffer strip of some wet meadow. And that's a big opportunity I'm looking to work right now, get some native vegetation planted, especially for pollinators.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, our next speaker is Bobby Webster from UW Green Bay Conference Center for Biodiversity, talking about introducing the WICCI Creek Natural Area. Take it away, Bobby.
Jim, and thank you, steering committee, for all your work putting this together. I'm Bobby Webster, and as Jim said, I work at the Conference Center for Biodiversity at UW Green Bay, and I'd like to introduce you to the WICCI Creek Natural Area. Next slide, please. So WICCI Creek Natural Area is a 76-acre natural area in Brown County. It's outlined on this slide in the black. It's located on the traditional lands of the Menominee, Ho-Chunk, and Potawatomi people. Most recently, it was owned by 3 different private land, one of which was a realtor, and 66 acres was platted for development. You can see it's very close to the bay, just north of the city of Green Bay and very close to UW Green Bay in the town of Scott. And I'll go into the natural communities on the next slide, but you can see there's old field and forested wetland here. And the organizations who acquired this land were the Northeast Wisconsin Land Trust and the town of Scott in partnership with UW Green Bay. The funders, there are many funders and they're listed in the handout, but I want to get into why this area was able to compete for the funding. And that was due to the significance of this property, both what's there now and its landscape. So the property has significant wetlands on it. It also has an important role in protecting downstream coastal wetlands at Point Sable Natural Area. It has huge potential to host habitat for threatened and endangered species, including peregrine falcon, great egret, Caspian tern, all of the bats. It also is an important role in protecting fish in Water Creek. And because it's located in W Green Bay and the WICCI Elementary School, which is an environmental focused school, it has huge potential for education and outreach. WICCI Creek Natural Area is also a significant archaeological site. So all of those things came together to allow this to compete for a lot of different funding sources for acquisition. Next slide. And so on this slide, you can see these are the current natural communities, approximately 36 acres of old field, which was cultivated up until last summer, and a prairie mix targeting pollinators held in late fall 2021. Approximately 5 acres of emergent wetlands situated within the old field, which had existed previously, some of which were cultivated, some of which were just left alone because they were too wet. So these were enhanced last fall with scrapes and berms, and they will be planted additionally this growing season. The green is approximately 12 acres of southern dry mesic forest. And you can't tell from this, but that area is a slope. So those are sloping down to Wakwia Creek. And then on the north, it's sloping down to an unnamed drainage. And these have a really unique mix of box elder, cottonwood, basswood, green ash, black maple. And then there's a few patches of some amazing remnant oak savanna on these slopes with burnt oak, white oak, and shakebark hickory. And then the pink is the forested wetlands or southern hardwood swamp. And both of the southern mesic and hardwood swamp have copious amounts of Dame's Rocket, garlic mustard, buckthorn, and honeysuckle. And we currently have funding to work on dealing with all of that and restoring that. So next slide, please. The vision here is that some of the land will be transferred to UW Green Bay, and we will continue working with Town of Scott and Northeast Wisconsin Land Trust and the First Nations community to continue restoring this habitat and educate the local community. We're partnering with Sea Grant to fund First Nations graduate student to assist us with outreach and education. We're holding a blessing again this year and intend on making this an annual event with a tobacco offering to honor First Nations and the gifts of nature at this place. And this Friday, a group of 4th graders is coming out to do a birding field trip. And we are going to be kicking off our native shrub and tree planting this Friday as well. So that is just a sample of our long-term vision. Thank you.
Thank you, Bobby. Let's see. Here's a question. How does this property connect with habitat or protected lands on the other side of the road?
Connected lands on the other side of
The road.
the road. Oh, 100% it does. That was one of our visions when acquiring this land. So we know that a lot of the bird species that use Point Sable also are going to be using WICCI Creek Natural Area. And that is one of the things that we are keeping in mind as we develop the restoration activities there. We're starting to do formal monitoring of the birds that are using this area as well as the bats. So there's a very strong connection there, especially with birds and bats. And we're going to be researching how the fish connect as well.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. Our final speaker for the lightning rounds today is Colleen Matula from Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, and talking about building resiliency in lowland ash forest ecosystems. Take it away, Colleen.
Thank you, Jim. Lowland ash ecosystems are complex and they vary across the state. Their placement in the landscape can be isolated depressional wetlands to drainways along streams. About 10% of our Wisconsin forests are lowland hardwoods. They have incredible value to a wide variety of plants and animals, an important cultural resource to our local Native American tribes. Next slide. Emerald ash borer is a non-native invasive forest bug that is killing all our ash trees and is devastating our lowland ash ecosystems across the northeastern states, including Wisconsin. Here's a photo of Harrington Beach State Park with those landscape scale impacts from this bug. You can see the gray dead trees over in this aerial photo. But we also know that black ash trees, 10 inches in diameter at these lowland sites, when they're alive, they transpire about 60 gallons of water each tree each day during a typical growing season. Now think about the impacts to hydrology with tree mortality from this bug. Next slide. One management alternative to address these ecological impacts is to underplant trees at these sites. So a 3-year project funded by Great Lakes Restoration Initiative will be implemented at the DNR Green Bay West Shores properties and Harrington Beach State Park to restore and maintain these forested ecosystems. So how are we going to do this? Well, first, part of this project will be to collect all the baseline data about these stands to help us understand the attributes of these lowland ash stands and perhaps what species might be successful at these sites. So here's a map of some of the potential sites that we have that are part of this GLRI project. Then the tree planting of native non-ash trees will occur at these lowland ash sites. Some of these sites are already infested with EAB and others are not. We'll obtain 10 different species of native tree seedlings from our DNR tree nursery out of Boscobel. Approximately 150,000 trees will be planted over 2 years, 2023 and 2024, during late spring in late May. In addition to tree planting, some invasive species control will be conducted at these sites. Next slide. These sites will be used as a demonstration for landowners and for forest practitioners in the future. We don't expect this project to be an end-all answer to these impacts. However, it's a chance for us to understand these systems and work towards alternatives in addressing these impacts. So this project is a sister project to an existing lowland ash planting over in the Lake Superior Basin that was started in 2019. And that was funded by GLRI as well. And we're seeing some great success from those plantings already. Here's a swamp white oak planting at one of those sites in a Lake Superior Basin. So with this project, planting these lowland ash sites will help to maintain and restore some of the forested conditions, restore hydrology and its function, and then prepare areas to become more resilient in the face of EAB and climate change. So thank you for listening, and I'll be around during the breakout session as well.
Thank you, Colleen. So we got a couple of questions here. Will these strategies be adopted statewide?
So as I mentioned, we have a sister project going on in the Lake Superior Basin already. We have other agencies that are involved in understory plantings as well. So we're part of this big lowland ash collaborative, and we get together every once in a while to share our successes and failures at these sites. So eventually there is going to be publications written and recommendations to adopt some of these aspects of the studies.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, you mentioned the swamp white oak, but what other tree species will you be planting and monitoring?
So in the Green Bay West Shores properties, we will have 10 native species. I can list them off if I have time here: red maple, silver maple, river birch, hackberry, swamp white oak, bur oak, elm, white spruce, black spruce, and sycamore.
Okay, thank you. And thank you to all of our speakers. Don't forget that you have the opportunity to still ask them questions by shooting them an email. You have the contact information for all the speakers in the handout and the materials for the meeting. And we will also have some time for an informal discussion at the end of the program from 11:30 to 11:45. And at this time, I would like to introduce our keynote speaker. Our keynote speaker is Madeline McGee, Monitoring Coordinator for the Great Lakes and Mississippi River at the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. Before joining DNR, she spent almost a decade researching how climate impacts water resources in Wisconsin and Minnesota. She is currently the chair of the Great Lakes Working Group of the Wisconsin Initiative on Climate Change Impacts. Welcome, Madeline.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for that great introduction. As mentioned, my name is Madeline McGee, and today I'm speaking as the co-chair of the Great Lakes Working Group for the Wisconsin Initiative on Climate Change Impacts. I'm going to give a quick overview of the new assessment report that came out earlier this year. So for those that don't know, WICCI is a collaborative effort led by the Nelson Institute at UW-Madison and the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources that was started in the mid-2000s. Next slide, please. WICCI's goal is to act as a link between climate science and climate adaptation. Our mission is to generate and share information that can be used by everyone in Wisconsin to develop solutions to climate change in the state. Next slide. So WICCI came out with a really innovative report in 2011 on climate impacts and adaptations in Wisconsin. However, that report is over 10 years old, and we have lots of new great science in the state. So during 2020 and 2021, WICCI updated the earlier report to cover new information on climate impacts and adaptation. The new report is in electronic format to enable rapid dissemination and easier updating. This electronic format also allowed WICCI to structure it in such a way that readers can start with higher level points in messaging, then use clickable links to dig deeper on topics that they may be interested in, such as detailed working group reports or other focused materials, videos, podcasts, etc. So this allows us to target stakeholders at a level that best suits them. For example, government officials who may be more interested in kind of the big picture messages and solutions can get that information easily, while conservation professionals who need more detail and technical information for their day-to-day work can dig into those details and access the information that they need. This report also incorporated an emphasis on climate justice, in comparison to the first assessment report. And WICCI hired a really great professional science writer, Dia Larson-Converse, who I think is on today, to interview stakeholders and develop narratives to improve science communication and put climate impacts into perspective for people in their everyday lives. Next slide. So the report took a little over a year to put together, and we had over 200 scientists and practitioners contribute to writing the report. And these people represented over 60 universities, tribes, state and federal agencies, and other organizations in the state. And all 14 WICCI working groups contributed to materials. Next slide. The assessment report is structured on 5 thematic areas: air, land, water, the built environment, and people, with different working groups contributing to the different themes. So today I'm going to give a very quick and dirty overview of the high points for each area, starting with the air or climate area. Next slide. So the biggest take home is that Wisconsin is getting warmer and wetter. If you look at the graph on the left, you can see that there's been a uniform warming trend statewide since 1950, and much of the area surrounding the Bay of Green Bay has seen about a 3 degree Fahrenheit increase in average annual air temperature from 1950 to 2020. On the precipitation side of things, there's a little more variability, but the whole state has gotten wetter between 1950 and 2020, with the Green Bay area seeing between a 10 and 20% increase in precipitation over that period. Next slide, please. And we're going to continue to get warmer. So modeling results show consensus around a 4 to 6 degree temperature increase statewide by mid-century when compared to the contemporary period. And greater increases are projected in winter and fall. And luckily for you folks around Green Bay and the rest of Lake Michigan, the lake acts to mitigate some of the warming temperatures along the lake shores. And you can see this if you look at that fall graph where temperatures don't warm quite as much in comparison to the rest of the state. So you guys look out a little bit there. Next slide. While ensemble model results agree on temperature increases, that's not necessarily the case for precipitation. So the ensemble climate models are in consensus that winter and spring precipitation will increase substantially statewide. However, the same can't be said for summer. So we use ensemble models because each climate model has slightly different conditions and ways of parameterizing variables like cloud cover and evapotranspiration. And then we average all of the models to try to figure out what will happen in the future. For the summer, about half the models anticipate large increases in summer precipitation and half anticipate large decreases in summer precipitation. So they average out to about no change, but at this point, it's really hard to know exactly where we may be for summer precipitation, and we likely have to plan for both wetter and drier summers. Next slide. What we can say with some certainty is that extremes will be more common in the future. So as you can see from these plots, we expect the number of days over 90 degrees Fahrenheit to increase by up to 30 days per year, depending on what part of the state you're in. And again, while we do see large increases along Lake Michigan and the Bay of Green Bay, you can see if you look at that right plot that there is some mitigating effect from the lake, and this may help offset some extreme consequences for communities along Lake Michigan. Next slide. And the same is true for extreme precipitation as well. So these graphs show days per decade with 2-inch daily rainfall events, and we expect increases of up to 10 additional days statewide, depending on where you're located, when comparing the end of the last century, beginning of this century to mid-century. Next slide. So moving to the other thematic areas, we know that climate change will impact all land types. Ag production will be less competitive, and climate change especially is overwhelming conservation efforts on soil health and water quality protection. All ecosystem types are becoming more stressed, habitats are becoming less diverse, and there's an increased risk of pest and disease, and these are all contributing to put climate vulnerable species at high risk. Next slide. For water resources, the big take-home message is that warming temperatures and changing precipitation patterns are decreasing water quality and causing significant change to aquatic ecosystem. We expect more harmful algal blooms and changes in aquatic species distribution that can be particularly problematic for some communities. as can loss of ice cover or weaker ice cover contributing to ecosystem impacts, but also significant events like wintertime drownings. Next slide. So if we look at the built environment, climate change means we need to rethink our approach to infrastructure. Current infrastructure was not built for future precipitation events. Coastal infrastructure is particularly at risk from changes in Great Lakes water levels and flooding. And statewide, flooding has had the biggest impact on our infrastructure and built environment. Next slide. Extreme storms and flooding so far have presented the greatest risk and impacts to communities and the people that live there. However, warming temperatures also directly harm health, and we expect that extreme warm temperatures can have significant impacts on community health in the future. When we think about community health and community impacts, it's important to remind ourselves that climate change disproportionately impacts certain communities. And statewide, folks who contribute the least to carbon emissions tend to have the greatest climate change vulnerability and impacts. And this is one reason why thoughtful planning and engagement with high-risk groups is crucial for climate mitigation and adaptation. Next slide. Great. So now that I've told you all the bad news, you're probably wondering what we can do. The short answer, although not necessarily easy, is that we need to decrease carbon emissions and invest in solutions for reducing emissions and climate impacts. And luckily, the WICCI report and associated materials can help you do this. So I'm going to provide a few examples from different working groups. Next slide. Multiple working groups touched on mitigation actions. So one example is from the agricultural working group, and they synthesized data on greenhouse gas emission sources in the ag industry in Wisconsin. So ag emissions represent the second largest emissions source, although it's still much smaller than the energy industry, which you can see looking at that little pie chart. But what the working group did was they worked to identify the largest sources of emissions from available data in Wisconsin. And you can see from this bar chart that agricultural soil management is the largest source of carbon emissions in the ag sector. Next slide. So from this assessment, they were able to then provide specific examples that could be taken in Wisconsin right now to reduce or offset these emissions. For example, increasing continuous living cover on agricultural lands can increase soil carbon storage and reduce the need for fertilizer applications and associated emissions. And I encourage you to read the Ag Working Group's information to learn more. And the Forestry Working Group, Infrastructure Working Group, and a couple of others had similar processes of identifying emission sources and developing mitigation approaches to reduce emissions in different sectors. Next slide. And if we pivot to looking at how to offset climate impacts, so that adaptation side of the equation, the larger assessment report lists various solutions for climate adaptation by sector. Then many of the working groups provided additional detail in their reports and on their web pages on how to offset climate impacts. So these resources and ideas can be used by anyone depending on what role and sector you're working in, and I'm going to go through a couple of examples. Next slide. So for the first example, the infrastructure working group has lists based on infrastructure sector. So this tiny writing that you probably can't read, don't read, includes recommendations for folks managing sanitary sewer systems and wastewater treatment facilities. So this is just one example of lists and actions that the infrastructure working group has put together. There are many more on their website, and you can just click on sector and get a full list of things that you could incorporate in your daily work. Next slide. So this list was developed by the Water Resources Working Group, and it includes adaptation strategies specifically for water quality. The full list, as well as recommendations for things like aquatic invasive species management, water level management, and ice cover, can also be found in the working group's report. Next slide. Many of the working groups, including my own Great Lakes Working Group, developed, like I said, a full suite of adaptation actions or approaches that can be used in tandem depending on your management goals. So these range from actions that try to maintain current conditions, for example, actions you might take to protect high quality habitats or threatened and endangered species, to actions that could promote or direct change a certain direction to offset climate impacts. So the last presentation was a great example of that. And looking through the components of the WICCI report and each working group's detailed materials can help you figure out how best to offset climate impacts for your sector and given your particular role or project that you may be working on. Next slide. Additionally, working groups have compiled a broad list of outside resources and worked with other partners outside WICCI to help folks walk through adaptation strategies. So one group that many of the other working groups have worked closely with is the Northern Institute of Applied Climate Sciences, or NIACS. And they've worked with NIACS to develop adaptation menus. So the Forestry Working Group, Great Lakes Working Group, Plant Natural Communities Working Group, and Fisheries Working Group have all worked with NIACS to develop these adaptation menus that can be used by practitioners to create site-specific climate adaptation solutions. And I encourage you to, again, go to WICCI's website for more information and check out the NIACS adaptation menus. Next slide. So finally, I'd like to wrap up by reminding everyone that many, and in fact, maybe even all, conservation efforts are climate adaptation efforts. So adding climate adaptation to what we're already doing can seem really daunting. It's a big problem, it's expensive, and everybody on this call on this meeting is already doing all kinds of great work, and you're all super busy. But many efforts that we're already doing will have climate adaptation benefits as well. For example, in the ag sector, soil health practices can have greenhouse gas mitigation benefits. Habitat restoration projects can build climate resiliency throughout the ecosystem, and water quality improvements can offset negative climate impacts. In addition, most projects themselves can incorporate a climate lens if we just think about what impacts are coming and think about how we could alter our plans. For example, increasing rainfall amounts in design standards can build resiliency into our infrastructure. Changing planting species on projects to be more climate resilient can make our habitat restoration projects more resilient. Or we can think about which project sites may be more resilient to fluctuating water levels and target work on those sites. So I'd like to leave you with that thought and challenge you to think about what you're already doing that has climate adaptation benefits, or how you can easily incorporate climate benefits into your current projects. And with that, I'd like to thank you all for listening to me for the last 15 minutes and open it up for questions.
Thank you, Madeline. I do want to remind everybody that Nicole has put the URL for this report in the chat, so you already have access to that. And then we do have some questions. So what are some opportunities you're excited about for use in these latest model predictions?
Yeah, so what I'm most excited about is thinking about really how we can target our efforts and where we can get co-benefits. So like I said, a lot of conservation efforts are climate mitigation or climate adaptation efforts. And I think there's a lot of room, especially in forestry, the ag sector, to incorporate a lot of climate mitigation benefits, which I think we really need. And then I deal primarily in water quality. And there's a lot of room to really make our water quality projects both more resilient to climate change and to add climate resiliency to the system. And just thinking about how we can do that and how we can use information, new information, to improve our projects and make all of our work better, I think I'm really excited about.
Thank you. How can conservation practitioners in Northeast Wisconsin utilize this report and working group strategies in their work?
Yeah, so what I would first recommend doing is looking at the report itself and dig into some of the technical details. Most of the working groups have like longer chapters that are more detailed. So the Great Lakes Working Group, for example, has just a full list of adaptation strategies that you can employ. And I think taking in those resources and then looking at what your, whatever it is your job is or whatever conservation efforts you're trying to do, and figure out which ones either you're already doing and increase the number of those that you're doing if you can. I know, funding and time and stuff is an issue, but then also think about little things that you can add to them is really useful and helpful, I think. And then the other thing that I would recommend is, keeping in mind that I know sometimes politics becomes an issue when talking about climate change, really focusing on the conservation and the co-benefit side of things, so that sometimes you don't even have to have that climate change conversation. Just say, well, we know water levels are changing. Who cares what the cause is? Let's just figure out how we adapt to that and know that that work is having a climate benefit, whether you're necessarily getting credit for the climate benefit, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and you mentioned a lot of us conservation practitioners are already performing mitigation projects, but what does community science play as far as understanding the role of community science, understanding climate change impacts?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think that's an area where we're less evolved in, I would say, and something that we need to continue working towards and incorporate more social scientists in our work. And some of the other groups in WICCI are doing that. And, you know, one thing that WICCI, I think, has really done well this last go around is that inclusion of stories and narratives. And the more we can get some of those impacts out to the communities, I think will help us both understand what other impacts we may be missing, because people, you know, have started to give feedback about like, oh, here's, you know, this other climate impact now that I kind of have a little more understanding of what climate change is. And that can help us manage, you know, our efforts a little bit better. And I think that kind of two-way engagement is really useful. I don't know if that totally answered the question, but that's what I've got.
Thanks. Let's see. Do you have recommendations on good resources to consult when planning projects for future climates? For example, if communities want their infrastructure to withstand warmer and wetter days ahead.
Yeah, great question. So one of the WICCI working groups, the infrastructure working group, has, I believe they've just wrapped up a new rainfall update. So it's basically an update to Atlas 14. And so that would be a good resource in terms of, you know, what standards or what, you know, what storms do you need to be thinking about in the future. So I would start there. And then the Coastal Resiliency Working Group also has a lot of really great resources on Great Lakes water levels and flooding and erosion. And I would encourage folks to look at those resources, and all of the working group chairs' contact information is on the WICCI website. And so you can reach out to them for more detail as well. This next year, WICCI is kind of, now that we've done the assessment report, putting a lot more effort into developing products to help folks and do a lot more outreach and training and workshops and that kind of stuff. So look for those. And if you have a particular need, feel free to share it with any working group chairs, because like I said, WICCI wants to work between, you know, link the science and adaptation. And it's really helpful to get, hey, this one resource would be really useful. Can WICCI do something to help me with it? And getting that feedback will enable the working groups to kind of focus their efforts there.
All righty. Let's see. I guess we have time for one more quick. What is the general thinking with respect to bay levels in a changing climate?
Green Bay water levels, I'm assuming. So right now, our best thinking for all Great Lakes water levels is that we are going to have higher highs, lower lows, and increased, I guess, decreased frequency, a shorter time between those highs and lows. So historically, Great Lakes water levels have oscillated on roughly 10-year timescale between high and low. Now we're seeing, like I said, expecting to see higher highs and lower lows, but also instead of, you know, maybe 10-year oscillations, as little as 3 to 5 year oscillations is kind of our best guess. But it's really hard to project because it's so hard to model the Great Lakes and model like evaporation off the surface of the Great Lakes and things like ice cover and how they all interplay. So our best guess, like I said, right now is increased frequency between highs and lows, and higher highs and lower lows, but kind of the long-term average to stay the same.
All right, thank you very much. And remember, everybody, I see some more questions coming in. Make sure you follow up with the presenters and get your questions answered. Now we're going to move into the photo contest winners and event wrap-up. We'd like to recognize our 2021 Green Bay Conservation Partner multimedia contest winners with a short video. And thanks to everyone who voted and submitted. Thank you.
Take a moment to acknowledge our 2021 multimedia contest winners. First up, we'd like to highlight our winners for Best Picture. In first place, we have the large-scale stream bank restoration project. The sun shines on this Fond du Lac County Land and Water Conservation Project, led by Sage Tank. This project, which is located in Pipe, Wisconsin, is a large-scale stream bank restoration effort. Submitted by Zach Laughlin, Fond du Lac County Land Conservation Department. Congratulations. Our runner-up for Best Picture goes to New Water's Adaptive Management Program. Intense rain events, like from this approaching summer storm, have the potential to introduce large amounts of nutrients and sediment to waterways from unprotected land. New Water's Adaptive Management Alternate Compliance option is working in the headwaters of Dutchman and Ashwaubenon Creek, pictured here, to install agricultural best management practices. These implemented best management practices, namely cover crops, stream buffers, and no-till, help reduce excess nutrients and sediment delivery to streams and improve local water quality. Submitted by Ben Young from New Water. Next up, we'd like to highlight our first place and runner-up for Best Video. First place goes to planting 90 acres of pollinator habitat. View from the tractor while mowing the pollinator habitat. Year 1 of conservation restoration on 90 acres. USDA National Resource Conservation Service programs implemented CSP, CRP, and EQIP on Shriver's family acreage in Oneida, Wisconsin. Looking forward to the continued evolution of this effort. Submitted by Patty Shevers. Please enjoy our first place winning video. Our runner-up video award goes to Henry Schuett Park. Henry Schuett Park, City of Manitowoc, Friends of the Manitowoc River Watershed, and LNRP Partner Group. This park is a public natural area that is adjacent to the Manitowoc River, which is owned and operated by the City of Manitowoc. The Friends of the Manitowoc River Watershed formally adopted this park with over 65.17 acres combined from the Upper and Lower Schuett Park. This park acts as a multi-use facility, but also provides important habitat. The Ice Age Trail runs through the park, a new kayak launch has been installed, and there is abundant access to the Manitowoc River. The park is a local favorite for nature lovers and includes various wildlife communities, a community-built playground, open-air shelters, grills, a kayak launch, exercise equipment, fishing areas, and over 6 miles of nature and cross-country skiing trails. LNRP drafted a restoration plan for 18 acres within the Lower Henry Schuett Park in January 2020, which was formally approved by City Council. The plan includes EAB mitigation, wetland restoration, and invasive species management, submitted by the Friends of Manitowoc River Watershed. Congratulations to our first place and runner-up submissions for the multimedia contest. Thank you again to all who submitted their projects and to those who voted. We really do appreciate your participation in our first ever and hopefully will be continued multimedia contest. Thank you.
All righty. All right, we're going to wrap it up here, people. Thank you very much for joining us today. Stick around for the next 15 minutes if you want to meet with some of the Lightning Talk speakers for an informal breakout group discussion. Don't forget to check out the virtual student posters, which was part of the materials you should have received for the meeting. Please complete the Roundtable evaluation survey you will receive via email. And reminder, this event has been recorded and will be posted to the Green Bay Conservation Partners website on the resources page. Thank you very much.